I am just a chronicler, and today I will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like you to tell me which city you are from and what time you are watching this. I will respond to those who comment. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. The camera shutter clicked. I checked the preview screen. Perfect capture of the Scottish coastline at dusk. Waves crashed against jagged rocks 300 feet below. The isolation was exactly what I needed for my photography project. I lowered my camera and looked at the house behind me. 2 stories of weathered grey stone perched on the edge of the cliff. Thick walls, small windows, slate roof. The rental listing had called it rustic and secluded. That was an understatement. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the village was another 3 beyond that. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floors as I entered through the heavy front door. The house was cold despite the space heaters I'd placed in each room. I'd been here 3 days and still couldn't shake the chill. At least the electricity worked, even if the internet was spotty, and there was no cell service. I made tea in the kitchen and reviewed the day's photos on my laptop. The sunset shots were good. The kind that would get attention in photography circles. This remote location was already paying off professionally. I just had to ignore the strange sounds at night. The first night, I'd heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. When I looked out, nothing was there except darkness and the distant beam of the lighthouse. The second night, the footsteps were in the hallway. I'd searched the whole house with my flashlight. Empty, all doors and windows locked. Last night, the footsteps had been right outside my door. I'd laid awake until dawn, listening to them pace back and forth. Tonight would be different. I'd set up motion-activated cameras in the hallways and outside the windows. If anything was moving around, I'd catch it on video. The sun set. I made another cup of tea and tried to focus on editing photos. The wind picked up, making the old house creak and groan. Normal sounds, nothing to worry about. At midnight, I headed upstairs to bed. The floorboards felt icy under my bare feet despite my thick socks. My bedroom was at the end of the long hallway, past several empty rooms with closed doors. The motion sensor lights I'd installed cast sharp shadows on the walls. Something caught my eye as I passed the pull-down ladder to the attic. A thin string was dangling from the trapdoor. It hadn't been there earlier. I reached up and pulled it. The ladder creaked as it descended. My flashlight beam revealed bare wooden beams and dust. And something else. A cardboard box. Tucked in the corner, I climbed up. The box was old and water-stained. Inside was a leather-bound photo album. Back in my room, I opened it. The first pages held black and white photos of the house from the early 1900s. People posing stiffly in Victorian clothes. Normal historical records. Then I turned to the newer pages. Color photos, but grainy and slightly out of focus. They showed people sleeping in beds. Different people, different rooms. All taken from doorways or windows, looking in at the unconscious subjects. My hands started shaking. The last photo was dated 3 days ago. It showed me, asleep in my bed in this house. I slammed the album shut and locked it in my suitcase. My heart was pounding. I checked all the locks again, then wedged a chair under my bedroom doorknob. Sleep was impossible. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard, watching the door. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my room. The doorknob rattled. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. The footsteps moved away. Dawn finally came. I packed my bags, ready to leave. But first, I had to know. I retrieved the photo album and opened to the last page. There was a new photo. Me, sitting up in bed last night, staring at the door in terror. I ran downstairs and out to my car. The engine wouldn't start. I popped the hood. The battery cables were disconnected. My hands shook as I tried to reattach them. Click, that sound, a camera shutter. I spun around, nothing there. Click, click, click. The sounds came from all directions. I abandoned the car and started running down the long driveway. The clicking followed me. I made it to the main road and flagged down a passing truck. The elderly driver took me to the village. I babbled my story to the police. They were skeptical but agreed to check the house. We found my car in perfect condition, battery connected. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The photo album was on my bed, open too. A new page. The photo showed me running down the driveway in panic. The next page showed me talking to the police. The next showed me standing in this room, looking at this album. I turned the page, blank, but not for long. The police found nothing suspicious, no signs of intrusion, no evidence of anyone else in the house. They suggested stress and isolation were playing tricks on my mind. I checked into the village that night. I woke to the sound of a camera shutter. On my nightstand was a Polaroid, still developing. Me, asleep in the inn's bed, taken minutes ago. I left Scotland the next day. Cancelled the rest of my photography assignment. Didn't care about the cost or professional consequences. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my home in London. No return address. Inside was the photo album. Every page now filled. Me on the flight home. Me in my apartment. Me checking the locks. Me opening this package. And dozens of blank pages waiting to be filled. I moved 3 times. Since then, changed my name, destroyed every camera I owned. But every few days, I still hear that sound. Click. The album always finds me, always has new photos, always has empty pages at the end. Last night, I woke to footsteps in my hallway. When I checked the album, there was a new photo. Not of me this time. It showed my bedroom door, shot from the inside, looking out at the dark hallway. In the doorway was a figure holding a camera. The figure was me, but I didn't take that photo. Tonight, I'll hear the footsteps again. The doorknob will turn. And for the first time, I won't be in bed pretending to sleep. I'll be in the hallway, with my camera. Click. Story 2. Sarah grabbed my arm. Look at that, James. I slowed our rental car. Through a gap in the cypress trees, ancient stone buildings emerged. A medieval village, complete with a bell tower rising above weathered tile roofs. It wasn't on our honeymoon itinerary or any map we'd seen of Tuscany. We have to check it out, Sarah said. Her eyes lit up the way they had when I proposed 6 months ago. I turned onto the narrow gravel road. The car bumped along past crumbling stone walls until we reached what looked like a town square. I parked next to a dry fountain. The village was silent. No tourists, no locals, no cars except ours. Just empty windows and sand-colored buildings and narrow cobblestone streets leading off in different directions. This is incredible, Sarah said, already taking pictures with her phone. How is this place not swarming with tourists? I checked our location on the car's GPS. Nothing showed up except empty space between the marked towns. According to the map, we were in the middle of nowhere. The church bell rang. One deep, resonant toll that made us both jump. That's weird, I said. The bell tower looks abandoned, like everything else. Sarah was already walking toward the church. Come on, let's explore. I locked the car and followed her. Our footsteps echoed off the stone buildings. The streets were clean. No leaves or debris you'd expect in an abandoned place. Almost like someone maintained it, but there were no signs of life. The church door was solid wood, darkened with age. I expected it to be locked. It swung open at Sarah's touch. Inside, rows of wooden pews faced an altar with tarnished candlesticks. Dust motes floated in the colored light from stained glass windows. The air smelled of old incense and mold. James, Sarah's voice was tight. She pointed to the floor near the altar. Wet footprints marked the stone floor. They led from nowhere to nowhere, as if someone invisible had walked through, just water leaking through. The roof, I said. But when I looked up, the ceiling was solid. The bell tolled again. The sound was wrong. Not coming from above in the tower, but from somewhere below the church. Sarah walked to the footprints. They're fresh, still wet. More prints appeared beside the first set. Then more. Soon there were dozens of overlapping wet footprints all around us. We should go, I said. We hurried outside. The square was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. Muddy footprints circled our car. Let's just take a few more pictures, Sarah said. When will we ever find a place like this again? I wanted to leave, but I couldn't say no to her excitement. We walked down one of the narrow streets, staying close together. The buildings pressed in on both sides, blocking most of the afternoon sun. Every door we passed was unlocked. We peeked into homes frozen in time. Tables set for meals never eaten, beds still made, personal belongings left as if the residents had just stepped out. Look at this, Sarah said from inside one house. I followed her into what must have been a child's bedroom. A doll sat on the bed, its porcelain face cracked. On the wall was a calendar from 1943. The bell tolled again. This time it seemed to come from right next to us, though we couldn't see any bells. More wet footprints appeared on the floor. They came straight through the solid wall. We ran outside. The street looked different. Had we come this way? All the buildings looked the same now. The square should be to the right, I said. We turned right, then left, then right again. Found ourselves back at the same house with the doll. The sun was getting low. Shadows lengthened between the buildings. Let's go back to the car, Sarah said. Her voice shook slightly. We tried another street, and another. Each one led us in circles. The muddy footprints were everywhere now, leading in impossible directions, up walls, through solid stone, appearing and disappearing randomly. The bell tolled every few minutes. The sound came from all around us, under us, inside us. Night fell. The streets were pitch black except for our phone flashlights. The batteries drained unnaturally fast. We found the square again after what felt like hours. Our car was there, covered in muddy handprints. I grabbed the door handle, locked. I have the key, I said, reaching into my pocket. Empty. Check your other pockets. Sarah's voice was high, panicked. I patted myself down. Nothing. The key was gone. Footsteps echoed on cobblestones. Many footsteps, coming from every direction. Getting closer. Sarah's phone flashlight died, then mine. In the darkness, we heard hundreds of feet walking on stone. The bell tolled once more. deafening. When our eyes adjusted to the dark, we saw them. Wet footprints appearing one by one, made by invisible feet. They came from every street surrounding us. We pressed against the car. The footprints stopped a few feet away, forming a circle around us. Sarah screamed. I felt invisible hands grab my arms. The bell tolled. We woke up in the car. It was parked by the side of the main road. Morning sun streamed through the windows. Sarah looked at me. Did we? I checked the GPS. We were 20 miles from where we'd turned off. The car's clock showed 8 a.m. We'd lost 14 hours. We drove to the next town and asked about abandoned villages in the area. The locals said there weren't any. One elderly man crossed himself when we described what we'd found. He told us about a village that disappeared during World War II. The entire population vanished overnight. Nazi soldiers sent to investigate never returned. The village itself vanished from maps. Sometimes, he said, people still stumble across it. Most are never seen again. The lucky ones wake up miles away with no memory of how they got there. The church bell tolls to mark each new arrival, he said, and it tolls again when it takes them. We drove straight to Rome and changed our honeymoon plans, but every night I wake to the sound of footsteps. Wet prints appear on our hotel floor, then fade away. The bell tolls in the distance. Sarah sees them too. Last night, she pointed to the mirror. Our reflections were of empty space. The footprints lead to our door now. The bell is getting louder. We never should have left the village. Or maybe we never did. The door is opening. The bell tolls. Story 3. The rental agent wasn't kidding about the windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels wrapped around the entire chalet, offering panoramic views of the Norwegian mountains. Snow covered everything outside. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. This is perfect, Mark said, dropping his bags. 2 weeks of complete isolation to finish your novel. I unpacked my laptop. If I don't get this draft done, my publisher will kill me. The chalet was ultra-modern, all steel, glass, and concrete. Heated floors kept the cold at bay. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances. A fireplace dominated the living room. Check this out, Mark called from upstairs. The second floor was a single open space with more glass walls. You can see for miles. Night fell early this far north. The glass walls turned into black mirrors, reflecting the interior of the chalet. I worked on my laptop while Mark cooked dinner. That's when I first saw it. A figure standing behind my reflection, just for a second. When I turned, nothing was there. Did you see that? I asked Mark. He looked up from the stove. See what? Never mind. After dinner, we sat by the fire. Our reflections flickered in the dark windows. The figure appeared again, standing between our reflected selves. Tall, indistinct, watching. Mark saw it this time. He jumped up and turned on all the lights. The figure vanished. Probably just shadows from the fire, he said, but his voice was uncertain. A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Lars, the local caretaker who'd given us the keys earlier. Forgot to mention, he said, stamping snow from his boots. There's a storm coming tomorrow. You might want to stock up on supplies. He looked at the dark windows, then back at us, and maybe don't look at the reflections too much at night. The mountains, they play tricks with the glass. What do you mean? I asked. old stories. They say people sometimes see things in the reflections. Things that shouldn't be there. Best to keep the curtains closed after dark. He left before we could ask more questions. We tried to laugh it off, but neither of us slept well that night. I kept seeing movement in the bedroom windows. The figure stood watching, clearer now. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too still. The storm hit the next day. Wind howled around the chalet. Snow reduced visibility to a few feet. We were completely isolated. That's when things got worse. I was writing in the living room when Mark shouted from upstairs. I ran up to find him staring at his reflection in the glass wall. "It's wrong," he said. "Look." His reflection moved a fraction of a second after he did. Like a delay in a video call, he waved. His reflection waved back, just slightly too late. "We're letting this place get to us," I said. But then I saw my own reflection. The delay was longer now. A full second passed before it copied my movements. The figure appeared behind our reflections again, closer this time. Close enough to see it had no face. We covered all the windows with sheets. It helped during the day, but at night, the reflections showed through the fabric like they were painted on. Our reflections stopped mimicking us completely. They stood still while we moved. Sometimes they walked to different parts of the reflected room while we watched. The figure was always with them, following, touching them with long fingers. Lars came by to check on us during a break in the storm. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked when he saw the covered windows. "The watcher in the glass." He told us the legend. The mountains were once home to beings that fed on human souls. They were trapped in the ice ages ago, but they could still reach out through reflections. They waited for people to look too long, to let their guard down. Then they pulled the soul out through the eyes, leaving the body empty. The reflections are the souls they've already taken, Lars said, trapped in the glass forever. We wanted to leave, but the storm had gotten worse. The road was completely blocked. That night, I woke to Mark screaming. He was in the living room, pressing his hands against a window. His reflection stood on the other side of the glass, smiling. The figure had its arms around the reflection's shoulders. I tried to pull Mark away. He wouldn't move. His eyes were fixed on his reflection. "It's so quiet in there," he whispered. "So peaceful. No more thoughts, no more worry." His reflection reached out. Its hand passed through the glass like water. I ran to the circuit breaker and killed all power to the house. In the darkness, I heard Mark gasp and fall. When I got the lights back on, he was unconscious on the floor. His reflection was gone. Only the figure remained, watching me from every window. Mark woke up an hour later with no memory of what happened, but something was different. His movements were slightly delayed, like he had to think about each one. His smile never quite reached his eyes. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching him sleep. In the window reflections, he was awake, standing next to the figure. They both watched me. The storm cleared enough the next day for us to leave. I threw our bags in the car while Mark stood in the doorway. "I don't want to go," he said. His voice was flat. "It's nice here, quiet. We should stay." I had to drag him to the car. He pressed his face against the window as we drove away, staring at his reflection. We never talk about what happened. Mark is different now. He spends hours looking in mirrors. Sometimes I catch him having conversations with his reflection when he thinks I'm not watching. Last week, I saw the figure standing behind my own reflection in our bathroom mirror. Mark says I should look closer. Really look. He says it's peaceful there, in the glass. No more pain, no more fear. Just silence, and reflections, and the watching thing with no face. Maybe I will look. Maybe I'll finally understand. After all, my reflection is smiling at me now, beckoning me closer. And I haven't moved in minutes. Story 4. I woke up at Warsaw Central Station with a ticket in my hand. I didn't remember buying it. The station was nearly empty. My watch showed 11:47 p.m. A few fluorescent lights flickered overhead. My head felt fuzzy, like I'd just woken up from a deep sleep. The ticket was for a night train to Warsaw. But I was already in Warsaw, wasn't I? An announcement echoed through the station in Polish. My train was boarding on platform 3. I walked through the quiet station. My footsteps echoed off the tiled floors. A janitor mopped in slow circles, never looking up. When I passed him, he disappeared around a corner. The train waited at platform 3, old-fashioned, with dark wooden panels and brass fittings. Steam hissed from underneath. It looked like something from the 1950s. I checked my phone. No signal. The screen showed 11:47 p.m. That couldn't be right. Several minutes had passed since I'd checked my watch. A conductor stood by the train door, tall, thin, wearing a crisp blue uniform. His face was perfectly still. "Ticket, please," he said in English. His voice was flat, emotionless. I handed him the ticket. He studied it without blinking. Car 7, compartment D. He didn't move his lips when he spoke. The train car was empty. Red velvet seats lined both sides of a narrow corridor. Brass numbers marked each compartment door. Compartment D was at the end. Inside was a small sleeping cabin with 2 bunks. No other passengers. I sat by the window. The platform outside was deserted. Now, no conductor, no janitor, no other travelers. The train jerked into motion. Steam whistled. We pulled away from the station. My phone still showed 11:47 p.m. The screen wouldn't change no matter how many times I checked. City lights passed by outside, then darkness. I couldn't tell which direction we were heading. I took some photos through the window. When I checked them, all the lights were blurred, smeared into long streaks. Strange shadows moved between them. Footsteps in the corridor. A woman passed by my compartment. Through the frosted glass, her silhouette was wrong. Too tall, movements too jerky. More passengers walked past. Their shadows were distorted. Some had extra limbs. Others seemed to float above the floor. I took a picture of the corridor through the glass. In the photo, the passengers' faces were blurred out, like someone had erased them. The conductor appeared at my door, still not blinking. "Tickets, please. You already checked my ticket. Tickets, please." His face never moved. I showed him the ticket again. "This is not your ticket," he said. "This ticket is for tomorrow's train, but you just checked it. You told me compartment D. Please remain seated. We will arrive when you complete your journey." He turned and walked away. His movements were too smooth, like he was gliding. I checked my watch again. 11:47 p.m. The train rushed through the night. Outside my window, the same city lights kept passing by. The same buildings. The same blurred streaks. I left my compartment. The corridor stretched in both directions, much longer than before. Red velvet seats repeated endlessly. Other compartments were full now. Through frosted glass, I saw silhouettes of passengers. They all sat perfectly still. None of them had faces. At the end of the car, I found the door to the next car. It opened into the same corridor. Same seats, same compartments, same faceless passengers. I walked through 7 cars, all identical, all leading back to my compartment. The conductor appeared again. Please return to your seat. The journey must be completed. What journey? Where are we going? You will know when you arrive. He handed me a ticket. It was the same one I'd shown him twice before. Back in my compartment, I tried to remember how I got to the station, what I was doing in Warsaw, why I bought a ticket. Nothing. The lights flickered. In the window reflection, I saw someone sitting across from me. When I turned, the seat was empty. More footsteps in the corridor. More faceless passengers walking past. I took another picture. In this one, I could see myself in the compartment, but my face was blurred out like the others. The conductor's voice came over a hidden speaker. Next stop, Warsaw Central Station. The train slowed. Buildings appeared outside, the same ones I'd seen all night. We pulled into a station. Through the window, I saw the same janitor mopping in circles. The same empty platform. My phone showed 11:47 p.m. The conductor opened my door. Welcome to Warsaw Central Station. Please exit and prepare for your journey. But this is where I started. The journey must be completed. Please exit and prepare for your journey. I got off the train. The station was exactly as I'd left it, or arrived at it, or never left it. A ticket appeared in my hand. I didn't remember buying it. An announcement echoed through the station in Polish. My train was boarding on platform 3. The conductor waited by the door, still, not blinking. Ticket, please. I handed it to him. Car 7, compartment D. The train looked older now, wood rotting, brass tarnished. The velvet seats were faded and torn. In my compartment, I saw someone sitting across from me. Their face was a blur. I checked my phone. 11:47 p.m. The train began to move. Through the window, I watched the same city lights pass by. The same buildings, the same blurred streaks. The conductor's voice crackled over the speaker. Next stop, Warsaw Central Station. I checked my reflection in the window. My face was gone. The journey must be completed. The train rushes on through endless night. Faceless passengers walk the corridors. The conductor never blinks. And in my hand, a ticket appears. I don't remember buying it. Welcome to Warsaw Central Station. Please prepare for your journey. It's 11:47 p.m. It's always 11:47 p.m. Story 5. Perfect spot, Mike said, dropping his heavy backpack. The tent poles clinked together. The lake stretched before us, still as glass. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks lost in low clouds. No other campers, no buildings, just wilderness. Sarah checked her GPS. 4 hours from the nearest road. Not bad for a day's hike. I still think we should have hired a guide, Jenny said, rubbing her sore shoulders. That's not real camping, Mike replied. Besides, I've got the maps. Downloaded, we set up the 3 tents in a triangle, facing the lake. The water was so clear, I could see straight to the bottom near the shore. Black volcanic sand lined the edge. The sun never quite set this time of year in Iceland. By midnight, it just dipped behind the mountains, leaving us in a weird twilight. We sat around the camping stove, eating freeze-dried meals and planning tomorrow's hike. That's when Jenny noticed the footprints. "Look," she said, pointing at the sand by the water. Wet footprints led up from the lake, adult-sized, barefoot. They stopped abruptly halfway to our camp. "Someone swimming," Sarah suggested. Mike shook his head. "Water's near freezing. Nobody could swim in that." I walked to where the prints ended. The sand was dry all around them. No other tracks leading away. "Probably just water seeping up through the sand," Mike said. But he moved closer to the fire. We went to bed around 2 a.m., the sky still pale gray. I woke an hour later to splashing sounds. Through my tent wall, I saw a dark shape move across the lake's surface, too big to be a fish. It disappeared underwater. More footprints appeared in the morning. Dozens of them, circling our tents, all leading from the lake, all stopping suddenly. "We should leave," Jenny said. "It's just someone messing with us," Mike insisted. "Other campers playing jokes. We haven't seen anyone else for miles," Sarah said. The lake's surface rippled. Something large moved under the water, then vanished into deeper parts. We packed up, ready to hike out. But the trail looked different. The mountains had shifted somehow. Mike checked his GPS. No signal. The downloaded maps showed us in the middle of a glacier, miles from our actual location. "That's impossible," he said, rebooting the device. I marked our route. We tried following our original tracks back. They led in circles, always returning to the lake. The water began to move strangely. Small waves lapped the shore, but there was no wind. The clear surface turned murky. Jenny screamed. Her reflection in the lake wasn't moving with her. It stood still, staring up at us through the water. We all saw it then. Our reflections were wrong. They moved independently, watching us from below the surface. Other faces joined them. Pale, distorted shapes drifting just under the water. "Run," Sarah whispered. We grabbed our packs and ran along the shore. The mountain paths had changed again. Every route led back to the lake. The sun should have been setting, but the light stayed the same. That weird, gray twilight. Time felt wrong. Wet footprints appeared ahead of us as we ran, behind us, all around us. The sand was covered in them now, hundreds of prints leading from the water. We couldn't outrun them. Every time we thought we'd found a way out, the mountains shifted, the paths changed, the lake followed us. Night fell suddenly, real darkness this time. Our headlamps showed only fog and black sand. The splashing started. Again, heavy bodies dragging themselves from the water. "Don't look at the lake," Sarah said. "Don't look at your reflection." Too late. Jenny had already turned. She stood at the water's edge, staring down. "Jenny," I grabbed her arm. Her skin was ice cold. When she turned, her face had changed, empty, like something behind her eyes had gone dark. "It's so quiet down there," she said. Her voice bubbled like water. "So peaceful. You should look. You should all look." She stepped into the lake. We tried to stop her, but her skin was too slippery, too cold. The water took her without a splash. More shapes emerged from the fog. Pale figures, dripping wet. Their footprints led from the lake, but didn't stop this time. They surrounded us, dozens of them. Their faces were familiar, like looking into warped mirrors. They were us, other versions of us, all with that same empty look. Mike ran. The figures parted to let him pass. We heard him screaming, then silence. When the fog cleared for a moment, he was gone. Close your eyes, Sarah said. Don't look at them. Don't look at the water. I squeezed my eyes shut. Cold hands touched my face. Wet fingers tried to pry my eyelids open. Sarah's grip on my hand loosened. Oh, she said softly. Oh, I see now. It's beautiful down there. Her hand slipped away. I kept my eyes closed, kept running. The wet hands grabbed at me. Cold bodies pressed close. My feet hit water. I'd reached the lake again. Open your eyes, Jenny's voice bubbled. Nearby, look at your reflection. See what we see. You're already here, anyway. Mike's voice came from under the surface. You've always been here. Just look, Sarah whispered. So close now. The water shows the truth. I opened my eyes. My reflection stared up at me. It smiled with too many teeth. I smiled back. The water isn't cold anymore. Nothing hurts here. Nothing changes. The lake is everywhere now. Or maybe it always was. New hikers come sometimes. We rise to meet them, leading them back to the water with our footprints. They always look, they always see, and in the endless twilight, the lake grows deeper. Join us. Look at your reflection. You're already here anyway. Story 6. The GPS recalculated for the 5th time. Lucy sighed from the passenger seat. Tommy and Angela had fallen asleep in the back. We should have reached the cabin an hour ago, I said, squinting through the windshield. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty. The road ahead disappeared into thick fog. Pine trees loomed on both sides, their tops lost in the white haze. No other cars, no signs, just endless grey asphalt cutting through dense Maine forest. My phone showed no signal. The GPS screen flickered, then went dark. Great, Lucy said. Now what? The fog grew thicker. My headlights barely reached 20 feet ahead. The gas gauge dipped lower. A sign emerged from the mist. Pine Valley Motel, next right. We should stop, Lucy said. It's getting late. I turned onto a narrow road. The fog swallowed us completely. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping the car. The motel appeared suddenly. A long, single-story building with a flickering neon sign. A handful of cars sat in the parking lot, all covered in a layer of mist. An old man stood behind the front desk, his face deeply lined. He smiled without showing his teeth. Was wondering when you'd arrive, he said, pulling out a registration book. You were expecting us. Oh, we get lots of lost folks on foggy nights. He wrote something in the book. Room 13's ready. I hadn't mentioned needing a room. The room smelled musty. 2 queen beds with faded floral spreads, wood-paneled walls, a TV that looked straight out of the 1980s. Lucy put the kids in one bed. They hadn't stirred since we arrived. They're really out, she said, frowning. I tried the TV, static. The phone was dead. Someone knocked. A woman stood in the hallway, smiling too widely. Welcome to Pine Valley, she said. We're having a little gathering in the dining room. You should join us. Through the open door behind her, I saw other guests in the hallway. They stood perfectly still, watching us. Their faces looked wrong somehow. Features slightly out of alignment. We're tired, I said, closing the door. More knocking. Different people each time. All with those strange smiles. All insisting we join them. Lucy checked on the kids. They're so cold, she said. I can't wake them up. I ran to the front desk, empty. The registration book was open. Blank pages, except for our names, written over and over in different handwriting. Back in the room, Lucy stood by the window. The cars, she whispered. I looked outside. The parking lot was empty. Our car was gone. Footsteps in the hallway, dozens of them. Voices whispering our names. The TV turned on by itself. Static cleared to show the dining room. People sat around tables, eating. The camera panned across their faces, all identical to the guests we'd seen, all speaking in unison. Join us, join us, join us. The image changed to our room. We watched ourselves standing by the window. The camera moved to show the kids in bed. They weren't breathing. Lucy screamed. The TV exploded in sparks. The door burst open. Guests flooded in. Dozens of them, more than the motel could hold. Their faces rippled and changed, becoming copies of our own faces. We ran. The hallway stretched endlessly, doors on both sides. Every room we passed showed the same scene. Families standing by windows, watching their children sleep. The front desk was gone, just more hallway. We found a fire exit. It opened onto the parking lot, but everything was wrong. The motel stretched up into the fog, floor after floor of identical rooms. Our car sat in every parking space, multiplied dozens of times. The guests followed, their footsteps echoing in perfect unison. They all wore our faces now. You're already here, they said with our voices. You've always been here. Lucy grabbed my hand. We ran into the fog. The road kept leading back to the motel. Different angles, different approaches, but always the same building rising from the mist. We tried every car in the lot. The keys in my pocket fit them all, but each one drove in circles, always returning to the parking lot. The fog pressed closer. The guests surrounded us, wearing our faces, speaking with our voices. The children are waiting, they said. Room 13 is ready. Lucy's hand felt cold in mine. Her face began to change, features shifting like the others. We should check on the kids, she said in that same strange voice. I ran. The fog swallowed everything except the motel, looming larger with each step. Every window showed the same scene. Us, standing in room 13, watching our children sleep. The old man's voice came from everywhere. Was wondering when you'd arrive. I blinked, found myself at the front desk. Room 13's ready, he said, writing in his book. My family stood behind me, smiling those wrong smiles. We should join the others, Lucy said. Her face rippled like water. The kids were already walking to the dining room, movements too stiff, faces blank. Through the fog. Outside, I saw headlights approaching. A car turned in from the road. A family walked to the desk. Parents, 2 children, all looking tired and lost. The old man smiled. Was wondering when you'd arrive. I smiled too, my face changing to match the others. Room 13 was waiting. It's always waiting. The fog grows thicker. New headlights appear on the road. Was wondering when you'd arrive. Room 13's ready. Join us. Story 7. The church stood alone in a sea of sunflowers. Gothic stone walls rose above the yellow petals, a forgotten sentinel in the French countryside. The flowers all faced the building, as if watching it. I set up my easel at the edge of the field. The morning light was perfect, exactly what I needed for my landscape series. My phone showed no service. I'd driven hours from the nearest town, following increasingly narrow roads until they turned to dirt tracks. The first canvas captured the church's weathered facade. The second showed the sunflowers. But something was wrong with the third painting. The proportions kept shifting. The church seemed closer each time I looked up from my work. By noon, dark clouds gathered overhead. The sunflowers turned, tracking something I couldn't see. Their movements made no sense, each flower facing a different direction, then snapping back to stare at the church. A door creaked. The church entrance stood open. I hadn't seen anyone approach. "Hello," my voice echoed off stone walls. No answer, but something moved in the shadows inside. I packed my supplies into my backpack. The smart thing would be to leave. But I needed these paintings. My gallery deadline was in 2 weeks, and I had nothing else ready. The church interior was cold. Dust covered everything. Pews, altar, stone floor, except for one spot. Fresh footprints led to a side door, then vanished. Above the altar hung a massive painting. I stepped closer, then stopped. My heart pounded. The painting showed a woman who looked exactly like me, dressed in medieval clothes. The nameplate read, Marie Dubois, 1647. More paintings lined the walls. Different clothes, different eras, but all with my face. All signed with different names. All staring directly forward with the same expression. The newest one was dated 1943. The canvas looked fresh, paint barely dry. A blank canvas stood on an easel in the corner. Fresh paints and brushes waited beside it. The door slammed shut. I ran to it, pulled the handle. Locked. Something scraped against stone behind me. When I turned, the blank canvas had moved closer. The sunflowers pressed against the windows, their faces distorted through the old glass. They were all watching me now. My phone was dead. The church had no other exits. A voice echoed from somewhere below. Time to paint. Footsteps on stone stairs, coming up from a basement I hadn't seen. I hid behind a pillar. An old woman emerged from a side door, thin, pale, wearing a black dress. "I know you're here," she said in French. "They told me you were coming. They always tell me." The sunflowers tapped against the windows. "Look at your portraits," she said. "All my girls, all so perfect, until they aged, until they changed. But you'll be different. You'll stay." She moved between the pews, checking each row. "The flowers choose," she whispered. "They find the right ones. Send them to me. Such perfect subjects." I knocked over a candlestick. The metal clang echoed through the church. The old woman smiled. "There you are." She moved impossibly fast. Her hands were ice cold when they gripped my arms. "Look," she said, dragging me to the paintings. "Look how beautiful they were. How beautiful you'll be." The faces in the portraits had changed. They were screaming now, pressing against their canvases like windows. "The paint preserves," the woman said. "Keeps you young. Keeps you perfect. Forever." She pulled me toward the blank canvas. Paintbrushes floated in the air, dipping themselves in colors. "Just hold still. It won't hurt. The flowers will help." Sunflower stems pushed through cracks in the windows. They wrapped around my legs, holding me in place. The brushes began to paint, moving by themselves. I saw my face emerging on the canvas. "Stop fighting," the woman said. "They always fight at first. But then they see. Such a gift I'm giving you." My skin felt tight, burning. The portrait was almost complete. I grabbed a brush from the air and stabbed it into the woman's eye. She screamed. The brushes fell. The sunflowers loosened their grip. I ran for the door. It was still locked. The woman laughed behind me, pulling the brush from her eye. The wound closed instantly. "They all try that," she said. "I've had centuries of practice." The sunflowers burst through the windows. Glass shattered. Stems wrapped around my arms and legs. "The flowers, remember," she said. "Every girl they've brought me. Every portrait I've painted. They never forget a face." I was dragged to the blank canvas. The brushes rose again. "Just one more painting," she whispered. "One more perfect face for my collection." The brush strokes felt like knives on my skin. I watched my face appear on the canvas, young and beautiful and terrified. My body went numb. The church grew dim. The old woman smiled. "Welcome to my gallery. I hang here now, between the others. We watch as the sunflowers bring new girls, perfect subjects, perfect portraits. The old woman paints. The flowers remember. The gallery grows. Another blank canvas waits. Another girl walks through the fields. The sunflowers turn to watch her approach. Welcome to our gallery. Your portrait is waiting." Story 8. The ferry captain refused to take us to the island. "Not today," he said, staring at the horizon. "Storm coming." The sky was clear. No wind. The water in the harbor was flat as glass. "We've booked the heritage tour," Mark said, showing our tickets. The website said boats run daily. The captain's eyes never left the horizon. "Not to that island. Not today." We found another boat owner at the end of the pier. He charged triple the normal rate, but agreed to take us. "Your choice," he said, untying the ropes. "But don't say you weren't warned." There were 15 of us, mostly tourists with cameras and guidebooks. The island sat 2 miles offshore, a green hump rising from the Irish Sea. No permanent residents, our guide, Tim, read from his notes. But evidence of continuous habitation since the Bronze Age. The last family left in 1954. The island grew larger. Stone buildings emerged from the morning mist. An ancient church tower rose from the highest point. Local legends say the island chooses a guardian every generation, Tim continued. Someone to protect its secrets. The stories claim the last guardian still walks the shores, waiting for a replacement. People laughed. I took photos of the approaching harbor. We docked at a small stone pier. The boat owner checked his watch. "Back here at 4, he said. "Don't be late. When I leave, I leave." Tim led us up a narrow path to the village. Empty houses lined the main street, their windows dark. The doors were all open. "That's odd," Tim said, checking his guidebook. "These should be locked." Inside the first house, the table was set for dinner. Plates, cups, utensils, all covered in decades of dust. "Looks like they left in a hurry," someone said. "Or never left," whispered another voice. We moved through the village. Every house was the same. Doors open, rooms frozen in time. Personal belongings scattered as if the occupants had just stepped out. A bell tolled. Everyone jumped. "Must be the church bell," Tim said. But his voice shook. The sound came again. Not from the church tower, from beneath our feet. "There's a tunnel system under the island," Tim read quickly. "Used by monks in..." The bell interrupted. Closer now. People started taking photos. The cameras wouldn't work. Phones showed no signal. "Let's check the church," Tim said. Inside, wooden pews faced an empty altar. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting colored shadows. Another toll. The sound filled the church. "Where is that coming from?" Mark asked. A door slammed. People ran to check. All the church doors were locked. "No problem," Tim said, fumbling with his keys. "I have the master key." The locks wouldn't turn. The bell tolled again. The colored shadows began to move. Someone screamed. A figure stood by the altar. An old man in vintage clothes. He hadn't been there seconds ago. "Welcome," he said. His voice echoed strangely. "We've been waiting." More figures appeared in the pews. Men and women in clothes from different eras, all slightly transparent. "The island has chosen," they said in unison. Tim ran to the doors, shoulder slammed them. They wouldn't budge. The old man walked down the aisle. His feet didn't touch the floor. "One must stay," he said. "The guardian must be replaced." The other figures stood. They formed a circle around our group. "Choose," they said. "Choose, choose." Everyone tried their phones. Dead. Cameras. Dead. The doors remained locked. "This isn't real," Mark said. "It's part of the tour." The figures drifted closer. Their faces began to rot, showing bone beneath transparent flesh. "Choose," they repeated. "Before we choose for you." The bell tolled directly below us. The floor cracked. We ran to the walls, looking for another exit. No windows large enough to climb through. "Time grows short," the old man said. "The island needs its guardian." The other tourists backed away from me. Their eyes were strange, empty. "Her," they said. "Together, choose her." The figures smiled with lipless mouths. "The tourists always choose one of their own," the old man said. "Makes it easier." I ran. The figures parted like smoke, then reformed. "No escape, don't fight," they whispered. "It's an honor, a duty, a gift." Their cold hands grabbed me. The floor crumbled beneath my feet. No, I fell into darkness. I woke on the beach. The sun was setting. The boat was gone. The other tourists were gone. I ran to the village. All the doors were locked now, except one, my new home. Inside, dinner was set on the table. Fresh, hot food. A mirror showed my reflection, transparent, ageless. The bell tolled beneath the island. I understand now, the duty, the gift, the waiting. New tourists come every day. I watch them from the shadows. The island watches with me. One day, another will be chosen. But until then, I walk the shores. I guard the secrets. I toll the bell. Welcome to our island. Someone must stay. The guardian must be replaced. Choose. Story 9. The castle wasn't on any map. Not Google Maps. Not tourist guides. Not even the detailed local surveys I'd brought for my research. But here it stood. Massive stone walls rising through the morning mist. Towers piercing the low clouds. I checked my GPS again. According to the screen, I was standing in an empty forest in southern Germany. No buildings for miles. But the castle gate was right in front of me. Iron-bound oak, at least 15 feet tall, carved with intricate patterns, and it was open. As a historical researcher specializing in medieval architecture, I couldn't ignore this. I took photos with my phone, marking the location. The pictures came out blurry, the castle's edges seeming to shift between frames. The courtyard was immaculate. No debris, no fallen leaves, no signs of decay. The cobblestones looked freshly swept. A fountain in the center sprayed clear water. This was wrong. Abandoned castles don't look like this. They decay, they crumble. Nature reclaims them. My footsteps echoed off the stone walls. Every window was intact, the glass spotless. Elaborate tapestries hung on the outer walls, their colors bright and fresh. The main entrance stood open. Inside, the great hall was set up as if for a feast. Long wooden tables lined with chairs, plates, goblets, and cutlery at each place. Candles burned in iron holders. I took more pictures. Each one showed a slightly different arrangement of furniture. In some, the tables were empty. In others, they were set for a banquet. A door slammed somewhere above. Footsteps crossed a distant floor. "Hello." My voice bounced off the high ceiling. No answer, but the footsteps continued, moving from room to room. Getting closer, I checked the entrance. The heavy doors had closed silently behind me. The footsteps reached the top of the main staircase. Still no one visible. My phone had no signal. The GPS screen showed me miles from my actual location. Another door opened, then another. The sound of footsteps multiplied. I ran to a side door. Locked. All the doors were locked. The castle's layout made no sense. Corridors led in circles. Staircases ended in blank walls. Rooms connected to other rooms that should have been hundreds of feet away. Every mirror I passed showed a different reflection. Sometimes empty hallways, sometimes crowds of people in medieval dress. Sometimes my own face, but wrong. Older, younger, dressed in clothes from different centuries. The footsteps grew louder. Dozens of them now, echoing from all directions. I found the kitchen. Modern appliances mixed with ancient hearths. Fresh food lay on cutting boards. Steam rose from pots on the stove. A knife block caught my eye. When I turned back, the room had changed. Old wood stoves, rustic implements, different century, different kitchen. I blinked. The room shifted again. Ultra-modern now, stainless steel everywhere. The castle was changing. Every time I looked away, rooms rearranged themselves. Time. Periods shifted. Only the footsteps remained constant. I ran upstairs, found a library that spanned 3 floors. Books from every era filled the shelves. A leather-bound volume lay open on a desk. The page showed a detailed drawing of the castle. As I watched, the layout changed. Walls moved. Rooms disappeared and reappeared. Next page, a list of names, dates spanning centuries. The last entry was blank except for today's date. The footsteps reached the library door. I knocked over a lamp, running to hide. It righted itself. The door opened. A woman entered, tall, pale, wearing a dress that shifted between styles as she moved. "Welcome, historian," she said. Her voice echoed strangely, as if coming from multiple throats. "We've been expecting you." More figures entered behind her. Different clothes, different eras, all with the same pale faces. "The castle remembers," they said in unison. "The castle collects." I backed away. My reflection in a nearby mirror showed me, in different clothes now. Old clothes, castle clothes. "Your research led you here," the woman said, as it led the others. "The castle calls to those who seek its history." She gestured at the other figures. Historians, researchers, archaeologists, all trapped between times. The castle exists in all moments, they said, past, present, future, and now, so will you. I ran the library door, led to a bedroom. The bedroom led to a dungeon. The dungeon led to a modern conference room. Time fractured. Around me, I saw the castle being built, saw it in ruins, saw it restored. All at once, my clothes changed with each room. My reflection aged and youthed. The figures followed. Their footsteps echoed from every direction, every era. Don't fight it, they called. The castle has chosen you. Another keeper of its history. I found a window, opened it, looked down at the courtyard. The courtyard from a century ago. The courtyard now. The courtyard yet to be. I jumped anyway, landed on soft grass. When I looked up, the castle was gone. Trees, empty forest. My GPS working normally again. I walked for hours, found my car, drove back to my hotel, but something was wrong. My clothes kept changing. My reflection shifted in every mirror. The hotel room door opened into a castle corridor. They were waiting. Welcome home, historian, they said. The castle remembers. The castle collects. I walk its halls now, my footsteps echoing through time. We wait for the next researcher, the next curious. Mind, the castle calls. The castle changes. And in every mirror, in every era, we watch. Welcome to our history. Your room is ready. Story 10. The real estate agent wasn't lying about the isolation. The cabin sat alone at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by Colorado pines, no neighbors for 10 miles. Perfect for writing my next book. I unpacked my laptop, while the sun set behind the mountains. The cabin was modern despite its rustic exterior. Wi-Fi, heated floors, security cameras. The previous owner had been tech-obsessed, the agent said. The first letter arrived that night. Plain white envelope, slipped under the door. Welcome to your new workspace. I've been watching you unpack. The blue sweater suits you. No signature, no postmark. I was wearing a blue sweater. I checked the security cameras. All 8 feeds showed empty rooms and hallways. No one had approached the door. The second letter came during breakfast. You take your coffee black, 2 sugars. You should try it with cream. It appeared on the kitchen counter while I was in the bathroom, 10 feet from where I'd been sitting. The cameras showed nothing. I called the real estate agent. Previous owner was a writer too, she said. Stayed 6 months. Left suddenly. Never came back for his things. I found his belongings in the basement. Boxes of manuscripts. All the same story, rewritten hundreds of times. The last page of each version was identical. They're watching, always watching. The cameras lie. Another letter waited upstairs. Your anxiety medication isn't working. I can see you shaking. The pill bottle was in my jacket pocket. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I checked every camera feed. Rewound the footage. Nothing. The letters kept coming. Details of my daily routine. Things I'd done when alone. Private phone conversations, quoted word for word. You talk in your sleep. Last night you said her name again. That story outline needs work. The ending is too predictable. Your ex-wife called while you were in the shower. She's worried about you. I disabled the security cameras, unplugged them, covered them with tape. Next letter arrived within minutes. We don't need cameras to watch you. I searched the cabin, found hidden cameras behind every vent, inside light fixtures, beneath floorboards, dozens of them, all inactive, installed years ago. But the letters knew things no camera could see. Your heart rate is elevated, 110 BPM. You should try to calm down. I smashed every camera, tore out the wiring, ripped up floorboards looking for more. The letters appeared faster. Destroying property won't help. We're not in the walls. We're not in the cameras. We're in your head. I ran outside. The forest was dark. Motion sensors triggered security lights around the cabin. A letter lay on the hood of my car. You won't leave. None of them leave. The car wouldn't start. Neither would my phone. Back inside, letters covered every surface. Welcome to the audience. We've been waiting for you. Your story is just beginning. I barricaded myself in the bedroom. No cameras there. No hidden wires. A letter slid under the door. Look in the mirror. My reflection watched me, but it didn't move when I moved. It smiled when I didn't. Another letter. Check the manuscript in your laptop. I opened the document I'd been writing. The text had changed. It was my story. Everything that had happened since I arrived. Every detail. But it continued past the present, describing what I would do next. I slammed the laptop shut. A letter appeared on top of it. Keep reading. You'll want to know how it ends. I opened the laptop. Kept reading. The story described me reading these words. Described my rising panic. Described the moment I realized I wasn't the writer anymore. I was being written. Letters poured from the ceiling, covered the floor, buried me in paper. Your outline needs work. Let us help. We know the perfect ending. They found my body 2 weeks later. The official story: writer's block, isolation, mental breakdown. The laptop was gone. So were the letters. But the cameras keep running, hidden in the walls, behind the mirrors, watching, waiting. A new writer just signed the lease. The first letter is already written. Welcome to the audience. Your story is about to begin. We're watching, we're always watching. And we know exactly how it ends.